A great pleasure in welcoming everyone back to the latest Coffee with EMBL, which I'm always surprised at the numbers, but this is our 24th meeting online. So, since we started with the very first one in the depths of the first lockdown and the start of the pandemic back in 2020. So we're a child born of the adversity of COVID, but then discovered a great way of connecting together. And it's wonderful to see so many old friends and young friends back again. This is something where we say to everyone who's joining for the first time, a very big welcome, and to everybody else, welcome back. For those of you who aren't familiar with the forum, this is an online discussion session. It's a way of bringing our community together for EMBL staff and alumni and friends. We also welcome friends. And to bring us all together across the world, I don't know today just how many countries everyone has registered from, but we very often have people from all continents and from 20, 30, or even 40 different countries bringing the community together. So fantastic to see everyone again today. Please do open up the chat because we welcome you to contribute in the chat, your comments, and as much as possible, if we can, Thomas and I will try to bring in people to make specific points or to contribute if you have something to say. We just ask everybody to make any points you wish to make as brief as possible, so we can bring as many people in together as possible. We have 260 people registered today, and I can see a lot of more people joining as we speak. And I think one of the reasons for that is definitely the fascination with the topic we're speaking about today. And we'll look forward to all of us learning something about this. And I think I can share a common feeling here that the world is changing under our seats or our feet. I think one thing that really brought this home to me is we were already very aware of the impact that artificial intelligence and machine learning was having on our lives and our research and our work across many different areas of society. So much so that a year ago, we held 3 Coffee with EMBL sessions dedicated to different aspects of the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning on our life and work. And despite that focus, when last November ChatGPT launched, it still seemed like something none of us had expected or been prepared for. And even for those of us thinking a lot about these issues, it really seemed to be a game changer in terms of what was possible. So we thought for Coffee with EMBL today and in the near future, it was very, very timely to come back to this point, to try to discuss this together and understand just a little bit more about what is ChatGPT and the related types of technologies. What is it capable of doing today? What might it be capable of doing in the future? And how are our lives going to change as a consequence? So Nush, do you, unusually we're going to have a couple of slides. So this is really the main issue we're going to discuss today that you've all heard about, and I guess many of you have already tried, is OpenAI's ChatGPT. But of course, as the saying goes, other products are available or will shortly be available from other suppliers. And I think we're probably more interested to discuss the wider picture of what these types of tools can do and what they can't do and what they might be able to do in the future. But one thing that's quite remarkable, this is just one of a number of slides like this that really brings home the S-curve that I think we're all sliding down or up. I don't know whether we're sliding up or down the S-curve, but I think we're on an S-curve. You could go back even further to the invention of the telephone or other types of devices and plot how long it took before 1 million people started using this new technology. But even if we just take this more recently and go back to something relatively modern like Netflix, I guess many of us here use Netflix and consume it and enjoy it. But it took 3.5 years for Netflix to establish 1 million users. When Twitter started, it only took, well, just under 2 years. Facebook, 7 months. Instagram, 2.5 months. But ChatGPT had 1 million users within 5 days of going live. And that just shows how much of an interconnected online world that we live in at the moment. So I think before we talk more about ChatGPT, I'm going to hand over to Thomas to just tell us a little bit about the underlying structure of ChatGPT. Thomas.
So thanks, Angus. I'm certainly not an expert of this, but I can give you just a brief introduction so that we have the discussion and we are together on the same page. So ChatGPT, so now you will see Nush has a slide that says reality versus hype. Okay, so the first part is a little bit of the reality. The second part goes a little bit towards the hype. So what it is a large language model, which is essentially an algorithm that can simulate natural language. Now, relative to previous algorithm, essentially this is much better because it has been trained on a massive database of text, essentially. Text that has been pulled from the internet. And essentially what the algorithm does is trying to guess what is the next word that is most appropriate in a conversation. So it recreates a sort of imitation of a conversation for you so that you can discuss with the text pretty much like you were discussing with a normal person. So, of course, it's an algorithm. It's been developed by OpenAI. OpenAI is in part owned, I think, maybe I'm not correct, by Microsoft, or Microsoft made a big investment on OpenAI. And therefore, it is essentially a product that Microsoft and others, and also OpenAI itself, wants to market, both providing the service, but also implementing the service in other types of services. For instance, to give you an example, some implementation by Microsoft are the chatbot in their Edge browser that is, you know, Bing or whatever it's called, so that you can, instead of searching things through the internet with Google with just a string of text, you can have a conversation and search things via conversation. Now, in some of the implementation, it can search the internet. In some others, it's still limited to a database that is somewhat huge, but walled and closed. So now, you know, this is more or less the features. Let's talk about a little bit of what it is not, because the temptation is a little bit to see this as an oracle or a mouth of truth, like the one that you see here in the image in Rome. So certainly it's not an oracle. So it's not something where you can type in and say, please tell me about this, and you will get always a correct and factual answer. Okay. In fact, it's not always accurate. And it is subjected to something that some people call now hallucinations. So it goes a little bit sideways in building these strings of tests. Okay. And, we can discuss this. This is more for a provocation. It's certainly not intelligent, but some people would, debate that it might pass a Turing test. And perhaps we will talk a little bit about that. The last point that I want to make is, because you interact via text, is something that requires an accurate query. So you really need to prompt it in an accurate way, because somehow, like it happens for science, if you have, a query that is not particularly insightful, you get maybe not a very insightful answer. So it's a little bit of garbage in and garbage out kind of a situation. So, I mean, this is just, to set the scene a little bit. Now I'll hand it over to Alvis that ran a little bit of an experiment, Alvis Brazma, with ChatGPT. And the idea here is testing ChatGPT to see whether it thinks or not.
So Alvis, over to you.
So as Thomas said, kind of this will be a sample possible interaction with ChatGPT, maybe for the benefit of some who haven't tried that, and even those who have tried that, maybe it will be slightly different way, really. Yeah. So, and my goal was to try to figure out can I say anything in ChatGPT what I would call thinking. So I asked ChatGPT to continue sequence 16, 32, 64, the one here. Yeah. So I will not blame those of you who are not mathematicians if you immediately can't recognize it. I think many people probably will do. I think many people will know that 16 is 2 to the power 4, 32 is 2 to the power 5, and 1024 is 2 to the power 10. Yeah, and indeed, the ChatGPT knows maths as it's claimed well enough to get that sequence reconstructed pretty well. But that was not my goal. My goal was to go a bit further and to ask whether it can do a little bit more than simply elementary maths, really. So I asked ChatGPT to continue this sequence. And if you look at it for a little while, then probably knowing the one above, you will figure out what this is. And if you don't, then don't worry. ChatGPT couldn't do it either, and I will try to teach it, and I think you will probably manage better than ChatGPT. So what ChatGPT says, this sequence doesn't seem to have an obvious pattern, but there are a few next terms. And indeed, some of them are all right, yeah. It does get right, but then suddenly, for whatever reason, it jumps over this one, yeah. So from this, it goes directly here. So it's not obvious why it does such a simple mistake, and of course these numbers in between are not what I would expect. Yeah. So what do I do next? Yeah. So I'll try to first let me extend the above sequence a little bit to see whether it actually can do a little bit better. And again, the same errors. Although I think this time it did recognize suddenly, for whatever reason, that it got it right here, but still the numbers in between do not make sense, and it basically tells me rubbish, really. Yeah. So let me try to teach it something here and to see whether it can pick it up. So I'm asking what is common between 32 and the pair 3, 2, and both contain digit 2. Yeah, that's right. But then additionally, for some reason, 12 times 2 power 2, which is 12 times 4, is 32. Obviously, this is nonsense. Yeah, so very kindly it apologizes that this is not, but still it says it doesn't seem that there is any relationship between 32 and 3, 2. So I asked ChatGPT, I try to teach it. Yeah, does 32 and 3, 2 have digit 3 in common? Oh, yes, you are correct. Yeah, both 32 and number 3, 2 contain digit 3. So, okay, then what is common between 32 and 3, 2? Now it kind of discovers, yeah, 32 and 3 both contain 2 and 3. And then actually it says another relevant thing, that 32 raised, that 2 raised to power 5 equals 32. So, okay, so let's go further. So let me see whether I can get rid of this one. Not quite. What's common between 64 and 6 and 4? And I was kind of hoping that at this point it will realize that 64 and 64 both have common 6 and 4. But again, the ChatGPT finds out only 4. So I asked explicitly, does 64 and 64 contain digit 6 in common? Oh, yes, of course. And then the next time it actually does a little bit better when I show the 3 numbers, show a 3-digit number 1 to 8 and 3 numbers 1 to 8. What's in common? It actually does recognize that all these are in common. Okay, now I was kind of hopeful that perhaps after this it will be able to do a little bit better. So for some reason, okay, it advanced. Good. So now in the light of what you discovered in the last 10 minutes, can you continue again, the same sequence, 32, 32, 64, 64, etc. Yeah. So it does start quite well, actually quite good. Yeah, it figures out this quite well. But then suddenly, when it comes to this one, again, the first dig, it actually figures out, but then suddenly there is some sort of a rubbish again. So I give up, really. And this is my conclusion, that to me, it feels that ChatGPT behaves like a weak student who does not understand anything, remembers something, and tries to buff his or her or its way through an exam. So my conclusion from this is GPT cannot think. And I'm somewhat surprised. Let me now stop sharing. We will need Alex. So let me kind of finish what I wanted to say here. So reading in some magazines and in Financial Times that ChatGPT can pass exams for some financial people, for people who are doing the kind of guiding investments, yeah, and economists. So to me, that means that these exams are rubbish. Yeah, if it cannot figure out this one, then I am a bit surprised what these economist and financial people exams really are like. And then two more points before I finish. Yeah, so I wanted to. Sorry, somebody said something.
No, sorry, it was no. You finish, Alvis, then I'll follow on.
Just very briefly. Yeah. So I want to say that to me, some earlier AI achievements like AlphaZero, who managed to reconstruct, rediscover the entire history of chess, is much more impressive than this large language model. And the second is, it raises me a question, whether there will be in the next few months or years, or maybe in the decade, a kind of a combination of things like ChatGPT, which is a large language model, with something more in-depth like AlphaZero, and actually this singularity or human level intelligence will be finally achieved. Or we will have another 40 years of AI desert before this will be achieved, or who knows. Yeah. So thank you. So I'm finished. I'm stopping here.
Thanks, Alvis. Well, hopefully you're stopping for now, but you'll continue to. I think you raised a number of very interesting points that we should be discussing. If you don't mind, in the interest of a discussion and a debate, I think it was interesting that you chose to focus on something you found ChatGPT wasn't very good at. Because, again, just for anyone who hasn't explored or played with it themselves, Alvis is completely correct. It is possible to find weak spots and things where it's sort of surprising that it seems I know about this and it's not very good. But there's an awful lot of things it can do as well. I'm afraid I probably fall into the category of one of your weak students, Alvis, in that it would be very easy in your exam to find a subject I would be embarrassed that I'm supposed to couldn't answer properly, even though I think there are some things I could speak about. So I think it's a very common thing that you can find areas where someone doesn't know. And I think in the interest of a broader discussion, it's good to recognize some of the things it can do. And then the other point is just, I'm strongly reminded about the previous thing we experienced when the first digital cameras were produced. I remember how people who were photographers, I was interested, were really dismissive of the limitations of the digital cameras. And it was true, you could find issues, but boy, it didn't take long before it accelerated so fast. So I also wonder that's something it's interesting to think, how quickly can it fill in, the areas of its lack of understanding. But perhaps, Alex, you could come in now.
Yeah, I'll share a screen for Alex, but can I just kind of very, very two points. Yeah, one is, first of all, this was actually the first conversation I had with ChatGPT 4.0. So it was not, I was not looking for many and found this. It was the very first I tried. And the second point is, I'm not dismissive of AI at all. If I'm dismissive of ChatGPT. And I'm sharing now the screen for Alex.
Great, thanks, Alvis. Okay, yeah, so I have had a lot of fun playing around with ChatGPT. And like Alvis, it's very easy to get ChatGPT to hallucinate things, and it gets very apologetic. And then, yeah, I find it also, it's like a bad student if it doesn't know what it's doing. But, you know, it's a really powerful at writing English language. And so we have been wondering how we can actually harness that at EMBL-EBI for doing some real science. And so I come from the area of making databases of proteins and non-coding RNAs. And there we're trying to take the scientific literature, extract information, and then write sort of human readable summaries, or extract information and put this into ontologies and organize it so computers can read it. So a very talented postdoc in my group called Andrew Green, he's an ARISE fellow. He has been looking at trying to write summaries about non-coding RNA genes. And rather than just saying to ChatGPT, oh, please, can you write me a summary about exist RNA? And then it goes make stuff up. What we actually do is we give it some context. We pre-feed it with information. And the way we do that is we go looking for the name or accession number or identifier of these different RNAs. We pull sentences out of the literature, and we tell ChatGPT to take those sentences and write a summary. But we have to do it in a very precise way, because remember, ChatGPT is a bit like a bad student. So you have to be very, very explicit in your instructions. And so the slide that I've got here shows what we're going to tell ChatGPT for each of these summaries. So we're saying that you're an experienced academic and always provide references for every sentence you write. And you're going to answer in a factual and unbiased way. And we say you must provide at least one sentence for every sentence you produce. Okay. And so then we ask it to focus on the summary text we're going to give it on an RNA gene called JPX. And then multiple times we say, really put a reference at the end in this particular format. And then the second paragraph on the slide shows this is the sentences that we're giving it. And there's each sentence has a PMC number at the end of it in square brackets, and that's the reference format. And we might give it sort of 10 or 20 different sentences. And then we ask it to write the summary. And so next slide, please, Alvis. And so here's the summary. And so you don't need to read the details, but actually it does a good job. It transforms these sort of disconnected sentences that we've given it, and it's turned it into something that's quite human readable. It's also managed, quite interestingly, for where two sentences say more or less the same thing. It's merged those two things together and added both references. So this is really great. We check, because it doesn't always add a reference, or it doesn't always add the right reference, we go through and we check that all of these things are real so that it hasn't hallucinated. So we have lots of checking. And if it doesn't give us the right answer, we just say, try again. And we keep asking it, we keep saying try again, because it's very cheap and easy until it gives us something that looks like, you know, it passes our tests. It still makes some factual errors. In fact, it says the closest upstream to gene upstream to JPX is Enox. And yeah, that's not true. I believe that's a synonym of JPX. So yeah, still some factual inaccuracies. So I think we will end up displaying these to users, but we'll say very explicitly, this text comes from ChatGPT. You should verify the facts yourself, and give people the link to the original text as well, so they can go back and verify. But this is quite cheap to do, and we can roll this out against thousands and thousands of RNA genes and maybe protein genes in the future. So I'm really excited about this, and I think that particularly as ChatGPT allows us to give it more information up front, we'll probably end up giving it entire sets of papers and asking it, you know, to make summaries. So Yeah, I think this is a very exciting area. Like Alvis, I'm sort of interested in things like, you know, is this intelligence? No, not yet. But you know, there was Google had an alternative called Lambda that they were working on, and one of their engineers who worked with this was convinced that their AI was sentient. Although if you go back and look over the transcripts that he was basing this opinion on, it's clearly not sentient. It's just responding in a sort of a very simplistic way. But these things are really getting more and more impressive, and they're growing bigger and bigger all the time. And so while this may be, you know, we have billions of parameters, once we get to trillions of parameters, then, you know, there may be new emergent properties. So it's a very exciting, interesting time to live in.
That point, Alex, about emergent properties is, I think, one of the most fascinating things, because I think the big shock for me, or for many people, is I'm not clear on what OpenAI expected or predicted ChatGPT to be able to do. And it's quite right. I mean, I fully understand the comments, and we'll bring in other people for comments. I see Jonathan has his hand up, but just that's something I'm really interested to learn more about. That you know, it was created, but it seemed that it was able to all of a sudden do much more than even its inventors expected. And then perhaps one of the problems, because it could do so much more, people then thought, well, it can do everything, and then you quickly find, hey, it can't do everything. But you know, how fast is that curve going to be when the next version of ChatGPT, and then we get to ChatGPT 7, 8, 9, 10, and just what might it be able to do? Jonathan, your hand is up. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I just had a question for Alex. He mentioned that in the future, you know, he would give a number of summaries to ChatGPT to kind of consolidate into a single summary. And I'm just wondering, have you tested whether you could give ChatGPT, let's say 20 or 25 summaries, but only a subset of them are actually related to one another, and test whether it can identify and consolidate or summarize those that actually do fit together?
Yeah, we haven't tried to test ChatGPT on these sorts of tasks, because the biggest, or one of the biggest hurdles, is the size of the prompt that you're allowed to give, how much text. And I think it was something like 4,000 tokens, and tokens can be something between sort of a letter and a whole word. And now it's gone up to 32,000. So actually you can start to give it really big chunks of text. But I think, you know, as that goes up, it just, yeah, I guess it becomes more likely that you'll give it lots of unrelated facts. I mean, I think at the moment, you have to really hold its hand to tell it what you want it to talk about. That's really important, because if you give it too much information that's unrelated and ask it to summarize, then I think it will struggle, at least the current models. But yeah, doing summaries of summaries, it's not something we've looked at. In fact, the more important problem for us is not the ChatGPT front end, it's working out what we give ChatGPT in the first place, and making sure that the extraction of those sentences from the literature is accurate. And actually, that's where most of the errors are coming from, that we're having problems with that process.
Alex, do you, so one of the issues that is often discussed, and I'm sure people, a lot of people are interested in this, is, you know, can it pass the Turing test, or when do you think it might be able to pass the Turing test? And perhaps you could just remind people what the Turing test is.
Yeah, so the Turing test is this test by Alan Turing about whether a machine was sentient or not. And it's also called the imitation game, after, you know, you've heard the same name for the film. And so basically, you ask a person, an investigator, to interact with an AI and a person through a keyboard sort of screen interface. And the question is, can the investigator tell the difference between a real person and the AI? Now, if you go searching the internet, some people say, oh yes, the Turing test has been passed by ChatGPT 4. I don't think it would have been a very harsh Turing test, because it's very easy to trip ChatGPT up if you're an investigator who suspects and has to decide if you're talking to an AI or not. Particularly the fact that, you know, if you ask it almost any sort of political or something question, it will immediately say, I am an AI. I am not qualified to answer this question. But if you were interested, I might suggest. So it's set up to try and not fool you. So I think it would be quite easy, given this technology now, to make an AI that could fool a person. I think it's almost certain that that's the case. And it just has to be not so good at answering questions, I think.
Yeah, I wonder how many...
dumb it down a bit to pass the Turing test.
Yeah, I wonder how many humans actually would fail the test if you put it there. Anastasios, you have your hand up. Would you like to come?
Yes, what I wanted to comment was in your question about OpenAI. It was very interesting because yesterday I actually attended another talk about ChatGPT and OpenAI. And I think what not a lot of people know is the fact that OpenAI actually started with the intention of actually democratizing AI. So one of their objectives was to bring AI to everyone else, because a lot of the other systems are actually proprietary and you don't do it. So in that sense, they have succeeded in what they've done because they have openly given access to that. And that's why we've actually seen that in 5 days, we've had millions of people try it, because also it's very, very simple. You just ask a question and you don't really know everything else. And one of the revolutions I think that is going to be happening is that it's democratizing a little bit how people can do stuff. Like you can actually create apps without coding. You don't really need to code, or potentially, if you don't really know that much code, you can do that. You can actually do a lot of plugins on ChatGPT that potentially can help you later on with iterations to make things better, or to actually accurately do a particular activity or a particular task. So I do understand that maybe that ChatGPT might not really be freely available in the future. And I do understand also that it has a lot of limitations, because as we go into it, there are going to be different ways that the model has been trained. But I think at least we should give credit to OpenAI for making it available to all of us, to actually play and also help them make it better.
So you don't. So some people take. I agree, but I mean, some people have also taken the cynical view that OpenAI have made it available so that we all train it, because they recognize that that's the way you train these large language models. You have lots of users. So was it really generosity, or was it actually a subtle exploitation of the community?
I don't know, depending on where you are in the spectrum of, where their intentions, kind of right or wrong. You can actually say that. You can also say, you can be cynical that, Microsoft is now actually putting billions into it. But I think in one way or another, a system and a model will need to be trained. And obviously you need to open it to a lot more people, and to be able, in a way, that's how, all of the systems, on software are being optimized. You just give it to some people. Well, they gave it to everybody else, but that was part of their original intention.
So at least one of the original founders of OpenAI was one of the high-profile signatories recently of a letter warning of the risks of these models with Elon Musk, and he's been very unhappy at how OpenAI has taken forward the original concept of it. What do you think of, and this is an open question to anyone, should we be afraid? Is there likely to be a real risk if it ends up being used inappropriately to bias elections or misadvertise products, or are there any other risks we should be aware of?
It's already happening. I mean, those sorts of things. And, clearly, language models are already sort of escaping into these sorts of things. I mean, one of the issues is that these large language models, the L in them stands for LLM, is large, and if you really want to democratize these things, then you can run them on your home computer, right? But the models are too large. The kind of model that you could get into your, the RAM on your home machines just has no power to do anything useful. So I think it's going to be interesting and surprising and change a lot of stuff when anyone in the world can run this on their laptop, and how this will change the productivity of people, or it may kill people's productivity as they get swamped under not being able to tell what's real versus what's made up by various AIs. So,
I guess we have to learn how to use it also. I wonder if really a good metaphor is like the sudden availability of power tools for a carpenter. If in the past you were always having to saw all the wood by hand, and then you suddenly get power tools, you don't go out of business. You can just achieve more faster and more efficiently. I think if used in the right way, maybe that's what, that would be the ideal outcome. That, when Alvis was describing how his first interaction with ChatGPT, it wasn't able to accomplish what he wanted. My first interaction was asking it to write some Python code to do a specific task, and it did it extremely well. And then I asked it to translate some text, and it also did that extremely well. So, I think an exciting thing is just to, ask people in the community here, as we have been doing, what have you been using it for, and what were your experience? And maybe Anastasios, you could start us off on that. Yeah.
I wanted basically to give my experience, because I approached ChatGPT from the communication standpoint. For everybody else that doesn't know, I work in communication and patient engagement at a healthcare consultancy in London. So when ChatGPT was launched, a lot of people have been saying, is this the death of public relations? Is this the death of communication as we know it? I'm not quite sure that we're there yet, or that my job is at risk. But I think that one of the ways that we are still exploring how we can use ChatGPT, but one of the ways that I found it's very useful for us is actually, I'll give you two examples now. One of them was when a new client comes to us and they're talking about a specific disease therapy area. I need to be able to get more information about the field. And typically the way that I would do it in the past would be ask somebody of my juniors to collect information from me. I could read systematic reviews, and I can also read analyst reports, which is the equivalent of the systematic reviews, but for the people who work in the stock exchange that talk about the companies. And I would need to compile that information in a way that is digestible for me. That would probably take me 1 or 2 days. Now I can ask ChatGPT, and it will provide a good enough answer for me. Now, another bit that we do a lot in our work when we're doing social media campaigns is that we need to find hashtags that are very, very popular, depending on the topic that we're doing. Again, I can do that. I can ask one of my juniors to use one of the proprietary tools that we have at work to actually do this analysis. It will probably take half a day to do it correctly. With ChatGPT, I can ask it, and it can actually do that automatically. Now, the interesting bit, and that we need to remember, is that ChatGPT is what we call a closed system. Like, we don't really know how they have generated the answer that it has generated. So this is, for me, by no means a clear answer that I can copy paste and potentially, kind of get it to my client, and then, for the rest of the day, I can, go to the sun lounge there. This is the first step for me to then go and check what ChatGPT has provided is actually quite interesting or not, or if it's correct or wrong. And I can use ChatGPT quite a lot, for ideation, for brainstorming, for talking about ideas, but there has to be somebody to curate what ChatGPT does in my profession, to do it. And also, I've seen somebody, I think it was, I think one of the speakers that was actually saying about tests. Yes, I do understand that, you can, ask, ChatGPT to do tests, and they could provide a really good answer or not. In my profession, what happens is that when I interview people, I ask them to do a test, and this is usually for them to write a press release. Now, writing a press release is the most, mundane and formulaic, task that I can actually ask somebody to do, but I can still understand from how they write it if they're good or wrong. Now, what I need to do right now is that I need to reconsider my test, because if ChatGPT can do that and can actually do it pretty well, I think I need to reconsider the test that I'm giving to the people that I want to hire, just need to make sure that I can understand something about them from the tests. And I suspect that this is what will need to happen in all other fields. We need to reconsider how we test people, and also, what are the requirements, what are the skills and tools they need to have, for doing the job that they do. And probably one of them is going to be knowing how to work AI.
Yeah, so maybe if I can jump in, I think here there were a lot of very interesting points. One point which is common to AI in general is this point of explainable AI. So how can we really understand what is, in the brackets, the thought process of the algorithm? And there's some fascinating example in medical science now where people are actually doing experiment and asking the algorithm to provide answers on how it came to certain outputs. And I think this is in general a problem linked to another point that you made, which was accuracy. Of course, if you can check the press release output for accuracy, then you'll be perfectly fine. But in the example that Alex was making, of course, when you are trying to automatize summary, and then you don't have an automatized version to check for accuracy, or at least to measure, estimates the errors that are introduced, that becomes a big problem. But I wanted to also give the chance to Ryan to comment, because he had his hand up and he wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, thank you. I think Alvis said something important very early. He said, let's see what happens when you combine ChatGPT or similar tools with other technologies. And I think that's what we're going to see. We're only a couple of months into the life of this thing, right? So, augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. There's one other aspect I want to raise now, and that is there's a little bit reminiscence when Apple launched their computers, very cheap and free in the universities around in America, and they knew that might give them a market. I think, is it possible that's what we're seeing now, that OpenAI is actually giving this for free all out, and within 5 days it's 1 million? Now, are we going to become dependent on this? And whatever they charge us and control us with this later on, they will have some power over us. I'm also saying this in light of what is happening in the publishing industry, when the publishers somehow have control over us as scientists, publishing and so on. And the students, for those of us who teach, are extremely sensitive and aware of this. So these are things I would like to have some comment on. Thank you.
I think that's great, Rain, and also a perfect segue into me inviting in Thomas, who we've asked to come along and talk about the impact of ChatGPT and related tools for the publishing industry. Thomas.
Yeah. I hope I'm not going to give the impression that we're going to make you double dependent on ChatGPT and the publishers. That would be really the end. No, so I'm indeed at EMBO doing publishing things, and we use language models in different scenarios, in much more classical scenarios like structuring content, named entity recognition. But it's true that now with generative models like ChatGPT, it opens new doors, and often I wake up in the morning sort of being very scared that it's going to take over the world, and in the evening being completely excited that we can do things that were never possible before. So there are concrete sort of simple examples of how we try to use these models is, again, summarization, which is synthetic and extractive summarization, typically applied to the peer review process. So, as you know, we have 3 reports that may diverge in opinion, and often there is a section in the peer review that is very useful for readers, and we like to publish these reviews, a section that sort of gives the general comments on the paper. And so we try to aggregate these general comments from 3 different experts in a single summary that is very attractive and very easy to read, and that hopefully will prompt the readers to read the full referee report. So that is very cool. It works amazingly well. I have to say, you hear from my French accent that I'm not such a great English writer, and it is actually difficult to write a summary from 3 completely different things. So ChatGPT does a pretty good job. GPT-4 even much better. So there's quite a big step between 3.5 and 4. But we're still a bit concerned. Applying these models to science and scientific content is very sensitive. They tend to be a little bit inaccurate. We have not seen hallucinations really, but slight misrepresentation. And I think something we didn't talk about is that key of the success of ChatGPT was this process of alignment of the models with reinforcement learning with human feedback, where hundreds and thousands of curators looked at the response of GPT and trained a reinforcement learning algorithm to try to correct it. And then GPT was fine-tuned for that. And it gave this sort of very US, very enthusiastic, positive thinking, very sort of politically correct tone of GPT. And that is not always what we want for science. We want sort of something a bit more neutral, not too overly enthusiastic, something that is very factual. And so we're still evaluating to see if this can be really applied as Alex, I think, mentioned, to display that in a way that is very transparent, that makes it clear that this is automated content. Now, there are other applications, of course. In publishing, it's kind of infinite, and I could, speak for hours and hours. There are also concerns. Of course, this is now lowering the cost to produce whatever content, spam content, paper mills. And so in publishing, there are sort of immediate concerns that we might be flooded by content where we cannot distinguish so easily machines from humans. I think GPT 3.5 is kind of easy to spot still. I mean, so there's a style that is kind of GPT style. GPT-4 might be much better, and for sure in the future we will not be able to distinguish. So this is a concern. There's a concern in the industry, of course. Some of the jobs that existed, copy editors and these kind of things, may disappear. Typesetters, they may disappear. Most of the publishers outsource that to India, where there are a lot of jobs that depend on that. And this is, of course, something as a society we have really to think about. Now, I just wanted to react a little bit about the democratization of AI. I think, of course, I'm head of the Open Science Implementation Group, and we really advocate for open science, for open source, for open access. But we can see also a little bit the limit of that. And I think we have to consider for the moment these models as potentially dual use technology, like we see in genetic engineering or genomic engineering. Some technologies can be applied for the good, but also for the bad. These models have been aligned for the good with a lot of effort, explaining part of the success, but they could be aligned differently for the bad. And we can be sure that some people try to do that. And I think OpenAI has realized this sort of very generous idea of releasing all the code, being very transparent, is meeting some limits, at least for the moment. It may change, but at least for the moment, where technology like that is becoming so powerful that it could be misused and dangerous. And I think we have to think in a very responsible way what needs to be open, what needs to be democratized, and what needs maybe for a time being a little bit controlled under monitoring until there is a framework that allows to deal with that stuff.
So Thomas, one point you brought up is how it's very common in the publishing world. You say we have 3 referees, but as we all know, you know, and many of us who experience this as referees, or there's a bit of randomness as to who the 3 referees are. And when we want unbiased, objective comments, sometimes you don't get it because people bring their own prejudices. that's one argument for publishing things and letting the community comment instead of having 3, secret comments. How soon do you think you could have, whether it's ChatGPT X or some other type of large language model, how soon do you think it could act as the equivalent of an unbiased referee to give commentary? And could you run in shadow mode ChatGPT refereeing along with your 3 human referees and measure how well it does in comparison to the referees?
Yeah, of course. So as you know, we have been running in shadow modes since 10 years and have not told anybody, and nobody noticed. No, running in shadow mode, I do not know. Having full reports by a sort of autonomous reviewer or the autonomous driving journal, I do not know. I'm not sure this is what we want. I think it's very important to think about, why do we want artificial intelligence? Why do we want these models? We want them to help humans to really concentrate on what is important. We want to replace them. So where I see an interesting application of such models, when they progress a little bit more and they have access to real facts. Now they're very bad with facts. They're very good in sort of having nice sentences, but bad with facts, is with technical peer review to really check whether the real statistics are mentioned, whether the study design is proper, whether the data that is provided match what is actually plotted to the figure. We can already now talk to a figure, and having the figure talking back to us, we can talk to a database and having the database talking back to us. So this is going to be very useful to sort of ensure at scale a minimal standard in terms of quality and technical quality. Now, the human expertise, we should keep it. And this is why we're looking for 3 reviewers that we know they are not random. And we want to make science for science by scientists who have real expertise and cultivate their own expertise. And I'm not obligatory seeing the point here, trying to replace them. We want to do the science. We don't want the computers to do the science.
Well, I guess one point of replacing would be to have something that was consistent across. So that's always one problem, is when you have, when in grant review panels or anything, you get referee reports, but sometimes the quality or depth or bias is very variable. So maybe that, I mean, Alvis also, I said something right at the beginning that I strongly agreed with. I was a very enthusiastic chess player when I was younger, and I still follow the game. And it was very interesting to see the impact of the computational algorithms for playing chess, even before the AI-based systems like AlphaZero, which actually, it didn't rediscover the history of chess so much as reinvented how to play chess effectively. But what it did was it changed the professional game, so that now the World Championship that is going on at the moment, every game has to be played to a conclusion, because they can't pause the game the way they used to do in the past, because the computers would just intervene. And so the professional world changed completely, and they had to adapt the game to meet the reality of what computers could do. I wonder in the publishing field, or if anyone has comments in any other field, which things we'll have to change. I mean, in teaching, for example, maybe we'll have to move to live oral interviews to make sure that we are not dealing with a chatbot in future. Maybe that would be thing. I see a lot of hands going up. Alvis, your hand was the first one I saw.
Yeah, so I kind of completely agree, Angus, with you about the chess programs. And I might have given a bit wrong impression. I'm not talking the ChatGPT down. I'm just saying it can't think, while at the same time, I think AlphaZero can think. And the success of AlphaZero made me think that it should be possible. AlphaZero rediscovered the chess history. And I think it should be possible. We are not probably too far from AI, which can kind of rediscover, by looking at these kind of sequences of numbers, which I gave, rediscover the piano arithmetics, the axioms of arithmetics, and really properly think mathematically. ChatGPT can't do that. And to me, kind of this is what matters. You know, you can produce nice sentences, you can produce poems and songs, but that's kind of, to me, it's not the most interesting. That to me doesn't sound like a breakthrough. To me, the breakthrough would be when I kind of test these kind of things and say, oh yes, really, this program can properly think.
Okay,
and ChatGPT can't do that.
Sure. Anastasios, you had your hand up.
Yes, when it comes to communications, I think, as I said before, ChatGPT has the potential, to take over the most mundane jobs that we are doing so that you can concentrate on what is important. And in terms of communication, creativity is important. And I'm not quite sure that ChatGPT can do that. Now, you can debate a lot what creativity means, but I would like to use my favorite kind of my favorite term from James Young Webb, who says that creativity is actually finding a connection between two unseemingly unconnected things. And I think that ChatGPT will probably be helpful in making us find these things, but it won't be able to connect them. It is able to do a pretty good job on writing a poem, but if I compare this with my favorite poet, Constantine P. Kavafis, there is absolutely no comparison, because it's not only just the words, but the words mean anything, and you can do a pretty good job in putting one kind of sentence after the other. But if this sentence, one after the other, means much more when it is combined, and it can elicit things to people like emotions, then that is what's powerful. And I'm not quite sure that ChatGPT can do that. It can certainly do a really good job at trying, as I've seen with a poem that we've just put there, but I don't really see it, at least right now, to be much better than any one of the poets that they have written poems.
Yeah, but okay, I take the point completely, and I'm really interested to hear other people's views. I think you can look at this as a glass half full or half empty. The half full is that it can do it at all, and the half empty is, yeah, it's great that it hasn't totally surpassed the best. But I come back to my previous comparison with the first digital cameras. It was very easy to point to the limitations compared to other technologies, but yet history has shown us in a very short time, the digital format just improved so rapidly that it displaced virtually all the professional uses of film cameras.
I agree, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is that I don't really care that much if the photographer is using the old Leica model or the new one. What I do care is what does the photographer do with all of the tools that he has? Because previously, if you think about it, 20 years ago, in order to get a Leica, it was absolutely expensive. Right now, the camera that I have in my iPhone can do a really good job. Whether it's better than Leica, that's a different thing. But what am I doing with that? Me, if you ask myself, I'm just doing pictures that I feel that they're quite nice, and they're Instagram friendly and everything else. But if you talk about Annie Leibovitz, that person is able, with the tool that they have in hand, to do miracles. And that's what I think that we need to be looking in the future as well. Yes, I can do a pretty good job, but somebody else can actually do miracles with the tools that they have.
So I mean, it's a good point. So it's great that as humans there are still opportunities for us, but if it comes to generating diagrams, art, most of us are never going to aspire to be Leonardo da Vinci or Leibovitz in photography, but just being able to create some useful things. I mean, at least the background to what you're seeing at the moment here is a photograph taken this week on my iPhone, and at least it's in focus, which maybe wouldn't be guaranteed after I've been at the conference drinking in the bar if I was using a film camera. Thomas, what?
No, I just wanted to interject because just first to say that if you're looking at the chat, the chat is going in parallel with a lot of very good stuff. So we should save the chat, because, you know, the chat is discussing a bit, just to bring it up, you know, how do we test the student now that we have ChatGPT, which is, you know, nice views are coming up. And then I think I was fascinated by something that Thomas said about, you know, now with ChatGPT, we can talk to a database. So it's like a database now can speak, but it still lacks a lot of intelligence, right? You know, fact checking, we said, logic, we said. So maybe again, this is some sort of you know, intermediate step towards the I don't know what. I mean, you know, being positive, one would say the liberation of man, so that we can be creative and leave the tools behind, or we can discuss, you know, the bleak view, which is you know, the machine taking over us and putting us to do mundane tasks. I don't know, just to be a little bit provocative.
Yeah. Thomas Lemberger, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. I just wanted to maybe to provoke a little bit the discussion, to push slightly back to what Alvis was saying. I should say I actually agree with you, Alvis, but for the sake of the discussion, I would like to push a little bit back about this notion, you know, GPT cannot think. And of course, what do we mean by cannot think? And I think we have to be very careful not to be too quick with that. Of course, you know, in the example you showed, it didn't do well, and it's kind of very disappointing. Probably GPT-4 would do very well, but still doesn't matter. To me, one of the big shock was in the Palm a paper from Google, to see that a language model could explain why a joke was a joke. And that was, I was blown away. I was thinking, this is just not possible. This is not pattern recognition anymore. And okay, you get used to it, so you increase the bar. And now in the technical report from from GPT-4, there's the table 3, I think, the figure. And this is, again, there's a picture, which is a joke in picture. It's kind of a joke in picture. It's not even really a funny joke. And the question is, can you explain why this picture is bizarre and a joke? And the thing is describing exactly what is going on. And it's getting very hard to minimize that and to say, oh, this is just pattern recognition, next token type of thing. Well, it doesn't. There is something happening that resembles what happens in our brain. In a way, it feeds back on what we think we are. Maybe we're much more pattern recognition and next token type of thing. We, of course, have many other abilities, but seeing that a computer can do that is truly shocking. Now, the other thing is where it's very, in my experience, it collapses very quickly. And maybe that's another type of Turing test, a Turing square test, is actually not to chat with GPT. Because when we chat with GPT, we put our human feedback to re-steer the debate of GPT and keep it intelligent or semi-intelligent. One of the best things is to try to have GPT talking to itself. And I did a simulation with 3, 4, 5 agents, giving them slightly different personalities. So I had 2 scientists talking to a philosopher, so that was very entertaining. And there you see very quickly that this is a machine talking. And sort of it doesn't pass the Turing test at all. It's still very impressive. It's unbelievable that you can go for rounds and rounds and rounds. It doesn't diverge. It's very stable and it talks in a very cogent way, but it's not human. And so that is a little bit of a sort of a reflection that these models, they have a different kind of intelligence. They do things that are very surprising. Explaining why a joke is a joke, this is quite profound. And there are other things, they look like machines. And I think we are towards the emergence of something that we don't recognize very well. It's not the same as talking to your cat or talking to your dog. We're talking to a machine. And I guess it opens a lot of doors, but we look in the categories of psychology which might not fit well at all with this type of behavior.
So I see hands going up, which is great. I want to bring people in. Just also, I'd love to throw out a question about what's missing from ChatGPT when there's this conclusion that it's not quite human. what is it that we have to add in? Because other things may be possible as well to expand these language models or some other version. Perhaps it's some sort of emotional feedback that the algorithm has to experience. But in any case, Rain, you were the first hand up I saw.
Yeah, this is just a quick one to Thomas L. I will be very surprised the day it comes back from the consciousness research side saying that we are generative as the G in GPT. But I think that is maybe what you're asking, Angus. I don't think humans are generative, like to be just trying to guess what is the best thing to say now when we are discussing with you. This is not the human consciousness. I hope so, at least.
It's not.
Alex.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so I mean, this is interesting. So there's this sort of question of when will we get to have an artificial general intelligence? So something, you know, that's really the goal. And DeepMind, who solved the protein folding problem, that's their kind of stated goal of their company. And you know, Alvis sort of suggested, you know, is this going to happen quickly, or is there going to be this desert of 40 years before we get there? And I think there's sort of reason to suppose that it might happen relatively quickly. I mean, one of the reasons is these models are really quite easy to connect together. You know, it's just a bunch of matrices at the end of the day. We have models for images, we have models for language, and music, and people already combining these things together. And I think, you know, how far do you have to go before it can reason or think across all of these different modes? And what will emerge, particularly as we get to larger and larger models. So I think it's quite possible that we will get to some reasonable AGI in the coming decade.
Yeah, I agree. Yes,
and I think, you know, then we do get into all these science fiction things. What's to stop the AGI just wandering off around the internet, packaged in a virus? No doubt some academic will think this is a great idea, I'm going to package this in a virus, and then the AGI is sort of out there. So, you know, and we end up very quickly into sort of the land of Neuromancer and the Matrix and all these other science fiction things where, you know, man has a lot of problems, and having a superhuman intelligence that could answer them and solve them would be very, very useful.
But yeah, I think in an interconnected world, and with the risk of Skynet suddenly becoming conscious and launching weapons or something without human control, that's the scary influence. I think we should discuss that. Just before that, the more immediate problem, I guess I say, not a problem, but something that we need to think about that may even happen before that is, you know, it's clear that major advances in technology have huge impacts on society. When the automatic machines for spinning cloth were invented, it immediately threw huge, people out of work. There's not many people make a living now looking after horses compared to, you know, a few hundred years ago, and we all drive around in powered vehicles. And even in the vehicles, the petrol vehicles and diesel are being replaced by electric, and so that's changing things as well. I think we need to think about our societies for what's going to happen in the very near future when these advances have profound impacts that will mean whole categories of people won't be able to make a living doing the same job they were doing at the moment. And that probably will include some of us, or at least what we do has to change, because in the best outcome, we'll be like the carpenters who now get power tools and do the same thing more efficiently. Or maybe we end up being like the people who used to sew cloth, and then they don't need us anymore because you can make it 100 times faster in the factory. Anastasios, you had your hand up, I just say. You're muted, Anastasios.
Yes, I wanted to add to that. I couldn't actually agree more with that, in the sense that we really need to start thinking across a lot of different fields how we can retrain people. And I guess the current danger is that we won't be able to retrain people that fast, because these changes are actually happening quite fast. That's why I also think that I'm very interested to see what's going to happen on the European Union level when they said that they will probably seek to regulate the AIs who are going to be linked to profound changes in the way that we live. And as we said, also security. The Skynet example is quite could become quite real. I think going back to the previous question, what is ChatGPT missing? I think to me, when it comes to communication, there is a lot on communication that is not just writing things. If I say to you, I am glad, depending on how I'm saying it to you, you realize whether I am actually glad or I am happy, tired, everything like that. And right now we don't have that. But as Alex said, I think quite soon we will be having connections and links between the AI models or other apps that we might be able to get more out of the system. Whether it is good or bad, we will have to wait and see.
Sorry, please go on, Thomas.
No, I wanted to interject to say that, this is an easy implementation. We will ask OpenAI to implement the emoticon into the conversation, and then it will become very interesting. But this was a jump.
They were taken out. So explicitly, because so that there are ethical issues about AIs using emoticons.
Because it changed a lot the conversation among humans if you think via text. Yeah, and the other point that I wanted to pose as a question, because to me it's quite interesting, the potential answers is, why do we think that the ChatGPT could be inaccurate in text sometime and not particularly logic in mathematics? And in contrast, one of the best things that it can do, it's actually coding. Coding has to be exact, right? If you make a string of code that has something misplaced, it won't run. But it's amazing how spectacularly it works. So I think there is some possible answers to that, of why that it becomes very efficient while normal text is not efficient. But maybe somebody wants to try to answer the question.
Well, it'd be good as well. Oh, sorry, just before Thomas, you come in. I know I can see a lot of people in the audience who I know are professional coders or computer scientists who write code for a living. I'm really interested as well to know, do you see this as a fantastic tool that can help you to debug your programs that are not compiling properly, and you can say, hey, there's a problem, fix it, and save yourself 3 hours going through your code? Or do you see this as something where you're concerned, wow, that's, I may be out of a job here? But sorry, Thomas, please carry on.
No, I mean, I see in the chat and more competent people could comment, but for coding, of course, there is much more regularity and patterns and repetition. So in a way, this is sort of a golden opportunity for the next token and generative process to learn. There is, of course, a lot of training data to be used. Having said that, having used the Copilot, the GitHub tool for coding, it is extraordinarily powerful, but you still really have to be on top of it and really check. And if you're a little bit less familiar, and it really happened to me, and sort of try to use a suggestion without really knowing or really understanding, you can make big mistakes and lose a lot of time. So I think it's a sort of double-edged sword. I think the consensus is that it saves a lot of time and a lot of typing anyway. I just wanted to go back about what is missing from GPT, to go to the next level. And I think there are sort of 3 or 4 things that are missing. First is really an internal model of the world. Maybe there is some kind of diffuse representation of the world in this sort of statistical patterns, but there is no explicit representation of the world where the language model could consult. And this is a bit what I meant by talking to the database or talking to a model of the world. The second thing is there is no sensory system. The thing doesn't see, doesn't smell, doesn't hear. And the third thing, which is really, really important, it doesn't have a body. And I think when we will bring this embodied AI with which we can talk, that has a sensory system that monitors the external world and connect it to predictions about the inner world, which is the basis of emotion, there we are going to be very close to something quite disturbing, I think. And the big question is how we humans are going to react to something like this.
So I think that immediately makes me think of what I've seen on YouTube very recently of the Optimus Prime Tesla bot that's in development and that has transferred the self-driving real-world AI-based vision-based interpretation of the world to make cars drive themselves into a humanoid robot, which is already
which makes Elon Musk signing this letter very ironical.
Yeah, well, unless he knows something that we should all be worried about. Alvis, you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, so after this philosophical discussion, it's kind of I don't want really to go back to coding, but my point is a bit broader, really. Yeah, I think when humans are explaining algorithms to each other, think of simple algorithm like bubble sort, for instance. Yeah, how to sort the numbers. Yeah, usually we do it using examples. We are not writing the algorithm itself. We just show what do we do, and then our intelligence and logic is what actually is able then to basically to generalize this, to write down the general algorithm by looking at these examples. Yeah, this actually is where I came from when I tried that sequence. I thought, will it be able to generalize? And it failed, as you saw, pretty miserably. Yeah, and I think it's the same with coding. I think the reason why it seems to be good at coding is because there's a lot of code it can kind of look up. And it's still impressive because it kind of finds the right one. Yeah, that bit really is impressive. Yeah, but I think it's still a bad student who is trying to remember something rather than think for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I certainly have the impression, I'm interested to know if this is shared, that for me, when I first saw ChatGPT and first started playing with it, I accept all the limitations that people have identified, but it really felt like the lid of Pandora's box had been opened, and mixing metaphors, but the genie has come out of the bottle. And when I hear the recent discussions about regulating it or controlling it, my feeling is good luck with that. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I just don't see how it can. And that's why it's all the more important that I think all of us think constructively about what might it be able to do, because I don't think it is complete science fiction that Skynet becomes a reality, and the interconnected real world general AI with access to the internet could really be a genuine threat, because so much of our society is online at the moment and requires interactions that take place online. But I'm interested to know from the experts in the audience with more technical knowledge than me if I'm perhaps worrying unnecessarily. Anyone?
Good luck with fielding that question.
Well, I think kind of one example which has been brought up in this context is recombinant DNA. Yeah, in 50 or 40 years ago, really. Yeah, and that was regulated. Yeah, but that said, I think about 10, 15 years ago, I was reading an article in Scientific American how to do this at home. Yeah. So on one hand, it was regulated and probably was a positive thing, but then in a way, it's not regulated. And I think here the ChatGPT and the AI large language models are kind of relying on this huge compute power, which we don't have on our laptops. Yeah, but you know, in 5 years, we'll probably have enough on our laptops. Yeah, so from that point of view, I think it actually, Angus is right. I think good luck with trying to regulate it. Yeah, you can slow down it probably a bit.
Yeah. Can I just add just one thing, Alvis? I think the comparison with genetic engineering is really important, and it's true. It was regulated, and in biology, we know that dual-use technologies should be regulated, and they are. Where the big difference I see is that the world has changed profoundly, and now we have a very capitalistic oriented society with very, very few extremely powerful companies that are the only one to have the compute power to do this. And I think themselves, engineers on the ground, they would like to be regulated, but they are on this rat race for competition and to be the first, and nobody knows exactly how to stop that.
Yeah, and I guess the topic that we haven't understandably not addressed, but also worries me a lot, is how this will affect our political systems. I think, I mean, Alex, you probably have the view it already has done, and the electioneering, and I mean, at least in democratic societies, we like to think we have some ability through democratic processes to influence something. Maybe where it's wishful thinking. In other societies, for sure, you don't. And it does worry me, just this extra power that you give to authoritarian regimes to control people even more.
I mean, it's already happened. It's very clear. Maybe it hasn't been by the large language models, but it's certainly by groups of coders who, making these networks of Twitter users and building messages and passing them across the internet in various sort of social media circles. So this will power that whole thing. And so, yeah, we will have to be extremely skeptical in the coming years about what's real and what's not. And I think people just are not very good at that right now. I mean, quite poor anyway. So yeah, it's definitely, there's some risks to political systems.
Yeah, I think that point you've made is really the crux of the matter. What's real and not real? Because we're talking a lot about text and language-based reality in terms of what, but also in parallel, the whole ability to generate synthetic images is also in parallel. Just remarkable how fast that's going. So you don't even know anymore with photographic evidence or video evidence. Was it real? Was it not? Can we tell the difference? I really think things are changing. So I think the other thing that's not changed is the rate at which time advances. Anastasios, you have your hand up, and let's have a last comment from you before we wrap up. You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was just lowering my hand. I think Miguel also made the same question in the chat, like if you can actually use ChatGPT to weaponize and spread misinformation. Yes, this is real, but we have also seen, from the pandemic, that this has been happening without the ChatGPT. Obviously, ChatGPT and the other AIs can take it into the next level. And again, I think we need to re-educate people to try and understand what is real and what is not. And the challenge there is, again, emotion. I believe that this is real because it actually adheres to my viewpoint and the way that I see the world, as we have seen happening even before ChatGPT. And that's a real danger. But I remain optimistic that we can also use this technology for good. And I think that, we are at a crossroads in terms of doing that. It's just that we obviously need to act now.
I think that's a fantastic point to end on. I have to confess to having been an optimist all of my life, and I want to continue to be an optimist and feel it's our responsibility to do what we can to harness this for good purposes, because it will be there. We can't put it back in the box. So we have to find a way of living with it and making it into a force for good in general. I think I've learned a huge amount today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone who joined in has enjoyed it. This is a subject I think we will and need to come back to because it's so profound. We really want to learn more about how all of you are using these technologies in your own lives and how it's also changing your personal and working life going forward. And the next session for Coffee with EMBL will be on June the 16th. And we're hoping to have some other guests come along and also talk about how they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning and further developments. And who knows, perhaps by June, there'll be yet another version of ChatGPT that can do even more of the things. And I think this idea of embodying the model in a humanoid form is something that is already happening and going to happen. And that's something I think we should also take into account. So thanks again to everyone for joining today. Really great to see everyone, and we look forward to seeing you back on June the 16th.